I'm an assistant principal at an elementary school. And when I think about like the things that I have to do every single day, I think I approach the work very much like I'm still a teacher. I got to teach fourth grade yesterday. And it's like some of my best days have just always been spent like in community with like Black kids. And that just means a lot to me. This is my first year in that role. Prior to that, I was a teacher for about 4 or 5 years. I was an instructional coach, so kind of the mid kind of gray area, and then jumped the gun and now like get to be an assistant principal. So like having all of the different responsibilities, like every day is a little bit different. And I think like I came from a family where education was just like super important and never really strayed away from that. Wasn't always super sure like where I wanted to land and up, but have been like really blessed and just excited to like continue this work. That's my day job. Outside of that, I have a couple more hats. Currently getting a PhD. First year, like getting a PhD in reading and literacy education. So thinking really deeply about how Black people just approach literacy and how we actually like, always have. And it's a very like Black thing to want to learn and to be read. And so having a chance to study that and get very deep in the, like, what does the research and literacy in the literature say about how literacy has like, you know, been at times like harmful in a traditional sense. In like a public education setting. Yeah. And then currently I'm a leadership and policy fellow with Tennessee Department of Tennessee Educators of Color Alliance, and most recently doing some work on like research, design, and innovation at Rutgers Graduate School of Education. So doing a lot.
Yeah.
Night's very long, but
I was gonna say, I'm like, good guy, dude.
But I think like, you know, like LeBron talks about like being like in the pocket of the work. And I think I'm like really in alignment with the things and spaces that I want to be doing. And I just feel really fortunate about that.
Yeah, that's really good, man. So I mean, I was also in education.
Nice.
I told you I was going to tell you about this, but so I was in education for 8 years.
Cool.
And I was an English teacher, and then I transitioned to being in a more admin role.
Yeah.
But me and my family, we actually moved to China, and we were over there for 3 years. And I was a department chair of the English department for a secondary school, and kind of like the mouthpiece between networks for like English instruction and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's what's up.
And I did that. And to be honest with you, I loved my educational experience. I really enjoyed it. I mean, of course, there are times when, you know, it's just a freaking headache.
It is what it is, yeah.
But overall, I loved working with the kids. But one of the biggest problems that I came across, and this is, I mean, I was really deep in English and literacy. One of the biggest problems was students did not have like a relationship with reading. They struggled to have one in school. It was non-existent outside of school for the majority of students. And I taught in public school. I taught for MNPS, and, you know, predominantly Black schools, minority, heavy minority. And that was pretty much the case, you know, and I'm interested in like what pushed you into, you know, becoming an advocate for literacy, so much so that it's kind of driven you to get a PhD in there.
Yeah. I think you said you taught secondary, it's like high school, middle school.
I mean, teaching wise, I taught from 5th grade up to 12th grade. Yeah.
So I think like there's a couple things. So when we talk about kids developing like a relationship to like reading, I think one, if I like just don't have the foundational skills, like I have no interest in chemistry because I don't know how to do it. But if I don't have like the foundational skills to like effectively navigate like words, sounds, how words fit together to make sentences, how sentences fit together to make paragraphs and stories, then like I'm not going to be interested. And so part of my work for the last 3 years where I'm currently at has been doing a lot of like foundational literacy coaching and development of teachers to ensure that like kids have the most like basic skills in order to like be confident and fluent readers by the time they leave elementary school. And so the reality is that the way like I was taught to read was like you memorize like a list of sight words and you just like get those down packed and then you suddenly can read. And what we know on like the neuroscience part of like how people learn to read is actually there's like, you know, 10 to 12 different very like minute skills that are happening in the brain, like as we're learning to read. And so we understand that like the English language is made of 26 letters. Those 26 letters actually form to make 44 what we call phonemes. They make sounds. And so if a fifth grader, middle school, high schooler has not understood that we put sounds together to make words, we put words together to make sentences, then we attach meaning. If we are jumping straight to like comprehension, we haven't like attacked being able to like navigate phonemic awareness, decoding, being able to like read things quickly, both like addressing like fluency, accuracy, understanding that like the most like tiniest word, like the word is made of two sounds, two letters, one syllable, it's one word. So there's a bunch of like foundational literacy skills that just a ton of kids and adults, honestly, are missing. And so if you like go grade to grade and now you're suddenly a middle schooler or a high schooler and you have a couple hundred words you've memorized, like you can navigate the world okay, but you will always like hit a glass ceiling. And I think what is really fun and really like fortunate about what I get to do is we are training teachers to ensure that kids, primarily Black kids, never hit a glass ceiling. And for me, that's what like gets me up every morning, because like it's really hard. It is like really hard to teach someone how to read in a way that is not memorization, in a way that is like automatic. We call it automaticity. And so when I hear that, you know, my kid doesn't like reading, my first thought is like, okay, one, what access to books do they have at home that, you know, like a kid that will read something that they are interested in, but also underneath the surface, I do have to wonder like, okay, what like explicit skills might they not be the most like fluent or confident in?
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, man. So did you always, like when you were younger, did you always have a relationship with reading, and it was just kind of just there present?
Yeah, no, I think my parents, my mom, my dad, like I've had a library card since I was 18 months old. My mom and my dad were just like really active in like me and my brother, my sister's like academic career. And so I think like I remember like my parents reading to me at night, and I remember like us going to Barnes and Noble and mom just been like, pick out whatever you want. And so there's like an academic part to it, but there's also like kids will reflect what they see.
Yeah.
And so if I saw my parents, my mom would get home from work and she would pull out very like 90s Black woman, like her Sidney Shelton book, and like she would be on the couch. And I was like, okay, like we always had access to books. And so I think there's a communal aspect to it too, where kids, if they see adults in their life reading, if they see friends around them reading, they are more likely to gravitate towards that. And then the opposite, if they, you know, only see you as a consistent adult in their life, if they only see you, you know, scrolling on your iPad or scrolling on your phone, it's not like intentional, but that's what they're going to gravitate towards.
Yeah.
And so there's a like interpersonal and a communal aspect to literacy too that I'm like really interested in.
And that was a very pivotal thing for you in your life, is just having someone around who was actually reading.
Yeah.
And I think that's super important because, number one, I think a lot of times, and I'm trying not to get into politics whatsoever, it's just too much going on right now. It's been too much going on, but yeah, one of the things that we don't prioritize, or that people don't prioritize in general, race is not a determining factor, just anybody, is we don't focus on how our habits transition over to our children.
Absolutely, yeah.
And specifically in terms of like just education and reading skills and just the love of learning in particular. And it's like, it's so much beyond just like saying, oh, I'm reading. You know, sometimes you have to over exaggerate what you're doing for children so that they can get it. Yeah. And it's like, you have to be that intentional. So when we were planning to have kids, my wife and I was, since I was an English teacher and I knew the issue, I was in the trenches in the field. Yeah. I knew that just reading a little bit to my child from birth, even before birth, before my child was born, all the way and just forever, just keep reading something. The earlier you start, the more likely that child is to be
That's
successful.
what they gravitate towards. Yeah,
exactly. They're gonna pick that up and they're gonna want to. And that I followed that to a T. I was in a master's program at the time for literacy, and I was learning all these different things, and I'm like, this is actually very, very true. And it seems so easy for me because my wife and I, we kind of had our stuff together, so we weren't coming home late from work or anything like that, or struggling to find time. But I think a lot of that was just prioritizing the health of our children over our own, wants and needs at certain times.
And I think also, like, people do what they have. They do what they think is best. They do with like the things that they, like you said, can prioritize at that moment. And so just talking to a lot of parents, I find that a lot of them are just just not negatively, but just like unintentionally, like unaware of how, like,
pull that close to you.
Yeah.
Right there. Yeah, you're good.
Okay. I think it's like a lot of parents just are, one, like unaware of like how to support their kid, like their kid's literacy growth at home, but also are unaware of how like their own habits might also be like impacting their kids gravitating towards or away from books.
So you were an English teacher, right? So what grade did you predominantly teach?
Third grade reading.
Third grade reading.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it was specific. I thought in like elementary school, you kind of have.
That was really cool.
Did you have a homeroom?
I've taught in a couple different states, and I've taught when I taught third grade, it was at a charter school, and we were departmentalized. So we operated very similar to how like a middle school would, where every grade had a content teacher. So I was third grade ELA. There was a third grade math teacher. There was a third grade science teacher. And like our kids rotated. So you had a homeroom, and then they would go to their English teacher. They would go to their math teacher. They would go with their science teacher for a block. They would go to lunch, and then they would come back to you at the end of the day.
Sure.
So a slightly different setup, but then what like a normal elementary school, normal elementary school operates. But it was so cool because in that moment, for those years I was there, I got to really focus in on like third grade, who is like in most states, third grade is when they start taking their end of year exams. So in Tennessee, it's like TCAP or 10 Ready. Yeah. And that time it was Louisiana, so it was something different. But I got to get like really nitty gritty around like what are the skills that my kids need, not to just like be successful on this like end of year test, but just to like how can I give them the tools they need to be successful, like once they leave the grade. And it was so cool because I got to just like focus really heavily on like third grade literacy. And then when I transitioned to where I am now, got a chance to get really focused on like K2. So thinking about what are the like foundational literacy skills kids need to be successful, like before they like get to tested grades.
Sure.
Why literacy is so important to me is because like if I'm a confident reader in this area, then it unlocks so many doors for me everywhere else.
Yeah.
So that was always like really cool to see.
Yeah. And because I think that is really interesting because one of the things I used to love about teaching is when kids get it. When they see the connection between one subject and another, and you can kind of bring it all together. Especially, I mean, I've never worked with third grade, or seen kids kind of function other than my own children. But I'm assuming that a lot of that surprise comes like at those younger ages. And my daughter, she loves reading, but I mean, she's not really like, she can't really read on her own as well as my son can. Sure. But when she finds a word that she knows, she's like, Daddy, Mommy, look, I know this. Yes. Yeah. And it's like that joy is amazing. Now, my son is a little bit more developed in terms of his reading ability. So he doesn't get excited by understanding new words, but he gets excited when he can make connections from like a book that he was reading to like a show that he might watch or something like that. And he loves those connections. But so often, like when I was in education, I did not come across those moments a lot. Yeah. So what are some of the challenges that you saw in reading?
Well, okay. So I think like we do have to acknowledge that like I, as a kid, loved reading because like my parents like had access to things, right? And so I think a challenge often is, when like access is huge. And in serving like mostly Black and brown communities, like access to like books, resources, sometimes like the best a parent like can do is ensure their kids like to school on time. And like that's definitely something that we can acknowledge. And I think also like the inverse, the opposite is that like if I ask a kid like, oh, like what books do you have at home? And they're like, oh, I don't have any. Then that's also like, okay, great. Let's like find a resource. Let's find a workaround. But I think understanding that, you know, it's 2024. And like when I was teaching, it was like around COVID. That was like my last couple of years. And so there's like what worked to teach a kid how to read 10 years ago doesn't work anymore. Yeah. And so it's like one, like changing my own mindset around like how I learned to read, and also trying to like shift parents and like sometimes other teachers to think like, here is the thing that works. Here's like the data to suggest that it does work. And so in order to ensure that we are doing right by kids and by their families, we have to be able to like shift, pivot, and to do what is now best practice, because 10 years ago, yeah, that worked for the people that were there. And now we have to now we do have to shift. And I think in education, like that happens a lot. And it can get like exhausting. We're like, yep, I just got this thing down and I just like mastered this thing. And now a new research article coming out of wherever is now saying that this is now not as effective, and we have to shift and like continuously change, shift, improve like our own practice. And so it's hard. And I think now like managing adults to do that like on a larger scale it's hard. Yeah. So
And that was one of my biggest gripes, you know, in education when I was actually teaching, was that every year we had something new to learn. And it wasn't so much the learning something new, because I love learning new things. You know, I'll try anything in the classroom as long as I know that it'll help, you know, the student. But I didn't like the amount of research that went into some of the things that they were trying to implement. And you knew there wasn't a lot of research behind it, or the research was so recent that you couldn't really see the results. The problem with that is that as soon as they see that it doesn't work, they switch to something else. And it's like I felt like we were making a huge mistake by continually shifting how we teach things, because number one, the teachers are getting burned out. You see that in the media all the time. It's extremely difficult to get quality teachers. But then also the students also feel that, you know, even though they might not.
It's like, we did this last year and now we have to do this. But now what?
Yeah. So it's, you know, I think it's a little bit more prevalent with the younger kids, because they are hyper focused on what they're doing. Whereas, you know, in high school, they don't, you know, they're not really, they don't really get as much involved, you know, or at least that's what I've seen. But kids see that, and my son sees that, you know, like, oh, we learned how to read this way, or learn how to do this math problem this way or something. And then it's like, but now we're doing it totally different, and they're, you know, they might struggle. And I'm like, that's really difficult.
Yeah. That makes me think of, I think it was going into this current school year, I was instructional coaching for the last 2 years. So like sitting not in the classroom, not quite AP, it was such a cool seat because I got to kind of do what I want. Yeah. And so I got like really, really good at like coaching teachers up to do this like very specific thing in small groups called Heggerty. It's like a lot of hand motions to get kids to see like how sounds fit together. And it was like, cool, K2 was popping. I was like, yeah, we got this thing. The ball is moving. Got really good at like coaching other like coaches on how to do it. It was so cool. And then around like maybe March, April, we were making plans for this coming school year. And I was like, yep, we're going to do it. I'm like, I feel super confident. It's been 2 years. I am like fully set on like coaching teachers up to ensure that we like can get this thing rolling. Yeah. And then one of our directors comes and says, hey, you know, this research article just came out of somebody's think tank, and it suggests that doing it for this amount of time is actually not helpful. And I was like, but I see it's helpful and it's working. And they're like, yeah, we're going to shift. So again, I think understanding that the people that I work with in their different capacities, like we're all just trying to like do right by kids. And I was like, that is really frustrating that I just got really good at this thing and now we have to change it.
And that, I think initially that was one of the reasons why I kind of desired to go up into administration, because it gave me the opportunity to not just like recognize a problem, but to like get my hands on the problem a little bit. So when I was in China, I had the opportunity to be a department chair, and I had a lot of different responsibilities. I still had the opportunity to teach a couple of classes, which was cool, but I was in charge of like managing the curriculum and making sure that it was being implemented. So doing observations, having conversations with, people across networks. And first of all, let me just say it's a huge flex because man, it was like, I didn't see a lot of Black people like hitting that mark. And I was just like, oh, I'm in here with all these Chinese folks looking at me and everybody from people from different countries looking at me. And I'm like, we can get this together. And we grew, and that was one of the most important things that I saw. And the reason that our teachers grew, I believe it's because we were all trying to find new ways to reach the students and to teach them as best we could. But in China, it was a little bit different because we had a lot of like parent involvement was crazy. I mean, parents were super involved. And then also the kids had just a desire to learn. Sometimes it was unhealthy, their desire to learn. It's weird. Yeah, it's weird to hear that.
I mean, okay.
But when your desire to learn is only based on like merit, is only based on you wanting to just get into a good school so you can get a good job, and it's more so like your parents pushing you that hard, not yourself, that's when I feel like it can become a little bit, I can have a whole pie. Hopefully I'll be able to talk about this at some point. But I just really wanted to influence my teachers and help them to grow and help them to, identify different things they can use in the classroom. Yeah. What pushed you to kind of take the next step into admin?
Yeah. I think when I first started teaching, I was like, that seems like Nick, absolutely not. I was like very dead set against it for a really long time.
Same.
I was like, I just want to get like really good at like, I like what I can control in my classroom. Like these are my kids. I know exactly like how all the pieces fit together. And what was interesting, I was teaching in New Orleans. I was in Louisiana for most of the time I was teaching. And the network I was with was undergoing just a lot of weirdness. So like one of our schools was closing. There was just a lot of stuff about jobs. And so I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure this is like a sign I need to like pivot and like look at other options. And so got the instructional coach job, loved it. I was like, yep, I really want to like, like rock with this for as long as I can. It was so cool. And honestly, like my mentor, my principal, we're both like kind of, here's this thing that we think you would be really good at. And I was like, I don't know. I was like really unsure. I did the interview, killed it. And I think what pushed me is that when I think about like the things I was able to do in my classroom, I was like, I can love on kids. I can look at their data. I can move them. And I am only like touching 30 kids at any given time. And so I think what really like pushed me to think about like, what's the next step is to think about like, I want to do that. I want to like train other people to do that because like I love kids and I know what really good teaching looks like. And I think there's a lot of like really well-intended folks that come into the classroom that are just, and I'm sure like unaware of like what it takes to be successful in this space.
Yeah.
And so wanting to like keep kids at the center, wanting to make this space like sustainable because it was sustainable for me. And so wanting to just impact more people by doing the thing that I love to do every day was really, I guess, like what made me say, yes, I'll check that off on the offer letter.
Right.
And this is like the first year. And I think I would be lying if I didn't say like some days are really hard. And managing adults, it is a whole entire skill that I am like, every day is a little bit different, but I'm like, I think I'm really fortunate that I am like in the space that I am now because it affords me to like make mistakes sometimes, to be like, that didn't work. Let's like recalibrate and like try this. And what I do appreciate is that like me and like our like leadership team are really tight. And so like we hold each other accountable. We like mean the things that we say. And then if like one of us isn't, then we're able to be like, hey, it's not what we said we were going to do. Like, let's like refocus. And so I think like as first year, like AP, I'm like really grateful to be like where I am.
This is your first year.
Yeah.
Wow. So, so I'm gonna dig into that a little bit, but I before I do it, I think people don't realize that sometimes adults act very similar to children when it comes to like instruction or when it comes to like the desire to learn. So one of the things that I focused on in my PhD program was, and I did a PhD program in adult education
Cool.
leadership.
Yeah.
So, and I'm just now finishing my chapter 5.
Congrats.
I'm almost out, dog.
Congrats. That's big.
Yeah, I'm glad to even be on this show with you.
Yeah.
Because first of all, 2 Black men sitting here, educated.
It's a very rare space right now.
Man, it's amazing and it is an honor. But
Likewise.
But man, it's so difficult to get adults to want to
Oh my God.
to grow.
Yeah, it is. Wow. I think I often I don't like comparing like adults to kids, but I think it's just like the space that they're in. Kids are so much easier. And I think, adults like they have we have agency, they have, whatever preconceived, whatever that got them here. Adults come with like years of their own life and their own experience and their own like biases and blind spots and their own whatever. And that's all fine because we're all human. And I think like the instruction part is the easiest part. Like I can go in and like observe a classroom and like look at the gaps and like be able to say like, hey, do this. But I think it's like the mindset part that is like a whole skill in and of itself to like effectively shift people's mindset to think about like what is behind what you do or what you do or don't believe about like this group of kids.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that I struggled with was I wasn't a tough leader or manager. And I wasn't one who was going to come in and be like, look, get your stuff together. This is what's going on. I was really soft with my team. And I, in a sense, I wanted to be friendly as much as I could.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, I want to be your friend, but I wanted to at least come off as welcoming. But sometimes it really is so serious because they have children in their hands, like their progress. And they've just kind of built up like a resistance to change, a resistance to, just picking up some new techniques that might work because they've been, like we said earlier, there's so many shifts that come in education that it's like eventually you kind of just get burnt out from it. And you're just like, look, I'm all right. I'm not going to keep shifting and keep changing stuff. This is going to work. I'm just going to do this. And unless you make me do it.
Sure.
But that was one of the reasons, that was one of the things that inspired me to go off and, try to get my PhD. Because I was like, man, this is such an interesting space. And the more that I managed teachers, I managed like a group of 10 teachers when I was maybe 10. It was, I don't remember how many it was, but it was a whole department from 6th grade up to 12th grade. Oh, wow. Or not to 12th grade, not yet, but that was the job from 6th grade up to 12th grade, but we didn't have a full 12th grade yet. But it opened me up to just wanting to help teachers learn and help them to become comfortable with it. So that's, I think it's extremely cool to see that, you kind of have the same desire and trying to, just learn a little bit more, by getting your PhD. And I'm gonna ask you some questions about that too, because I'm interested in what your plans are with that.
Yeah.
But I think it's cool that you want to continue to develop. And I'm interested, like, where do you see yourself going? Like, what specifically does your PhD focus on? I know you said literacy.
Yeah, so it's a PhD program in reading and literacy instruction. So looking at like history of public schools and how reading, like the role that reading and literacy has played in what I'm interested in is looking at like Black male teachers that are in elementary schools that teach reading to Black boys. Because there's we know that there's research around if a Black student has at least two Black teachers by the time they graduate, they are like 33% more likely to pursue and complete like college and whatever else they decide to do. Yeah. And so what I do know is that right now Black male teachers make up, it's like every year it kind of teeters between like 1.8 and 2% of like all public school teachers. And wow, despite the research showing that there are like massive benefits to not only just like Black kids, but like all kids when they have a black male teacher, I'm like, that is such like a cool space. Cause in my circle, it's like in my circle, I know so many. And that's like I know a ton of guys that are teachers, but really interested in that aspect. also like Black male teachers that teach the science of reading. So like they teach science of reading to Black boys, and like all the different variables that are like at play to make that not only like a constructive relationship, but also what are like the larger academic outcomes year over year. Still like fleshing it out, but I think there's a really cool, like I get to play around with like reading data, and also get to play around with like, you know, the history of public school in America is like really odd and at times like traumatic for Black people, for Black boys, even like more specifically, because we understand like when schools were first integrated, like we had Black kids being bussed out to white schools, but that also meant that there was a time where like it was like teachers, nurses, and like church preachers were like the three most prominent jobs in Black America. Sure. But when schools integrated, that also meant that a ton of Black teachers and like Black principals like lost their job. And so you had one time where teaching was one of like the top 3 career aspirations for Black people in America. And now you shift into Black people as a whole make up about 7%, and Black men make up like less than 2 at times. And so really interested in like the sociocultural impacts that are also at play as to one, why there's so few, and like what barriers continue to like dissuade like Black men from coming into this space. It's been like super beneficial for me, but also like once they're in, how can they be like sustained, retained, and like feel like this is a worthwhile space while they are, you know, like you said, like teaching other people's kids. Really excited about it. It's a really cool space. And I'm like, I'm someone like, one day I'm going to write a book about grad school, because I tried it a bunch of times. It didn't work out. But I think finally like finding the space that like pushes me like academically and to think about what are the larger implications of this work, I'm like really, really like jazzed about.
Yeah. And I think that's also extremely important, because, you know, oftentimes, I mean, if you get a PhD, you're like 1%. You're like in the 1%.
And it's hard, and I'm stressed right now. I got a paper due later.
Yeah, man. And I mean, I've done enough papers, and I'm glad to see the end of it. I mean, a dissertation is, killer. That's one of those things.
Yeah, get my committee together right now. It's wild.
But, you know, I feel like if you have a passion for the area that you're in, the area that you're studying, and you have specific goals that go beyond your research and can be you applying that research to put your hands to something tangible, something physical, I think it just makes getting a PhD so much easier. So for me, I was in education. And then upon moving back, I transitioned over to a charter school, and there I was a instructional manager there. So I took more of an administration role there here in Nashville, and the school was a turnaround school. Okay. So, you know, they kind of were fighting an uphill battle. Yeah.
I know that struggle,
man. Yeah. And it was really challenging for me. Not because the students, because students are going to be students regardless, but it was challenging for me because I feel like, those in leadership at the time were just struggling with trying to figure out what was going to work, so, and, they got a bunch of eyes on them also trying to demand certain things. And, so they're trying their best to, switch things around. But then that experience was a transition point for me because I've never been just so overwhelmed and stressed. And people think that the teachers stress the most. But now I'm like, I see a different light, and I can tell you that, it's not always greener. The grass is not always greener.
I feel like we don't talk enough about like how just like hard turnaround work is. And I think I've only these are the only type of schools I've ever worked in. And so for me, it is like very like, there's always a ton of meetings. People are always in the building. And it's not often like until I talk to like other people that work in other settings, like maybe private or else like parochial, where it's not the case. And like, I know right now, like this is where I'm supposed to be, but I'm also interested like, this isn't the norm for someone else. Yeah. So yeah, it's a give and take.
Right. And so after that experience, I just went ahead and like, I went back down and I was like, look, I'll just teach at this school that's near my house. And, I love teaching. So they're not, I love that part. So I went back, and then it just was not the same for me. You know, everything just kind of shifted. The school curriculum had changed, and now they were kind of forcing us to do a specific thing every day. Whereas I come from an environment where I always had the autonomy to do what I wanted. And that's what made everything just really worthwhile for me and for the students too. Because, oh man, so many memories, so many things I could talk about. But it kind of prompted me to get out of the education space and focus more on adult learning. And I actually ended up switching over to tech industry. Cool. And now I'm a designer at a tech company in Nashville. And a lot of the techniques that I saw, that I see in the corporate world are techniques that I saw being used.
Teachers, I feel like if you're watching this, like, please stay, don't leave. But I think teachers are some of the most like skilled people because you have to understand like how to take like very big like concepts and make them like bite-sized enough that like a kid can understand. You have to, like, you're constantly making, like, you're designing PowerPoints, you're designing like learning resources. Like in one setting it's called homework, another setting it's called like, this is a self-paced learning resource. Like, you have to, like, if you're a leader, it's like all organizational development. And like schools, like living, breathing organizations. And like you gradually over time, you just acquire like a lot of skills that in another setting, like, are like the gold standard for how people like work and maneuver.
Yeah. And that is that's one of the things that I loved about my experience teaching, is that whenever I was teaching English specifically, I don't know how it goes in any other class.
Me neither.
Man, I could talk about different subjects. I could use different modalities, like much easier than I think other subjects would probably be able to do that. Like like you said, creating PowerPoints, creating video or using video presentation, public speaking, any of that stuff I could bring all in under one roof and just kind of hone in on those skills for myself so that I could disseminate information to the students. And that was super cool. But moving forward, like outside of the classroom, now you're in admin. Like, what are you planning to get into? Like, what's the next move? Like, after you get your PhD?
Yeah, I'm gonna go to Disney World.
It's expensive. Disney World
is. It's so expensive.
Dude. Yes,
for no reason. Like I said, I really like where I'm at. I think that, and I'm not gonna be there forever. And later on, further down the line, when I've like, had a chance to breathe, I really like the idea of like crafting like a school from scratch. I think like I've been in a lot of different spaces and have like, there's like a Google Doc that I have like, I liked this, I didn't like this, I would do this, I wouldn't do this. And so, yeah, I think like one day I would love to like launch a school that is like in my head, the most like perfect option. So that again, like, yeah, I want my own school one day.
Yeah. And I think now we have I feel like that, not that it's easier, but I feel like there's a lot more resources out there that make it manageable to, start new schools. There's a couple of schools that I saw that, one principal I actually am trying to get on the podcast, but I might not be professional enough, but B Academy. It's an all girl school.
I know someone that sends their daughter there.
Yeah, I see that school all the time, and man, I am so impressed. And
it's like mini Spelman College.
Yes, yeah. And and it's so beautiful to see, all of those girls. And I don't know if it's like specifically for minority students, but there are a lot of minority students there, students that look like my daughter, and I love that. To see them all under one roof and to kind of be able to bond in that way, man. It makes me so excited for them. It makes me excited for, the admin over there and the teachers. There's another school, Invictus, that I think is new. Yeah. I don't know a lot about that school, but I just saw it just come up, and I'm like, man, I love the idea of trying to establish something.
Like, what I think I appreciate about the story about that school is that it's a full like. Parents were there from like the school's conception to be like, what do you see? What's missing? What would you like to see? I know there's like, Tennessee, a lot of red tape, but I really appreciate that the founder of that school was super intentional about like bringing community members into it and not just saying like, we're going to drop this in this neighborhood and send your kids here and like, it'll be great. Yeah. But like getting really like nitty gritty around as folks whose kids right now go elsewhere, what are you missing? What would you like to see? Great. Our promise is that that is part of the experience here.
Yeah.
I think if more schools were that intentional, we would have kind of like you said, like way more parent buy-in. Like our parents show up and they show out. They will come to things. They will send things back, and it's great. But I think, yeah, there's a lot more about like intentionality around like asking again, like in another arena, like these are your clients and the product is like a full education for their kid. And so as much as you can get like feedback from your client about the product, then you'll have like a more well-rounded experience for all people.
Wow. That's cool, man. So I'm gonna try to close up in just a second, but so how long have you been in the education space in total?
This is year 8.
Year 8?
Yeah, this is year 8. Yeah.
Cool. So, and you've been in a lot of different places, not just Nashville, but
yeah. I started teaching fresh out of college. I was in New York City. Then for the most time where I was teaching was in New Orleans, Louisiana. Loved it. Love the people. Love the food. Hate the weather. Hurricanes.
Okay.
Evacuated. You know.
Yeah. Sure.
And then then came to Nashville.
What advice would you have for someone who's trying, like let's say a college student who is wanting to get into education and they're kind of nervous. Maybe they don't want to be a teacher. Maybe they want to be an admin, or they don't know what they want to do. What message would you tell them to kind of navigate the education space to kind of get a good start? Let's say that.
Yeah. I think be very clear around like why, like why this space, why here, why now, and be okay with like your why changing, because mine definitely has. I think also like do your research, like ask, like if you're going on the interview, like ask all the questions. I think also like be open to, we kind of talked about it, but like be open to change. And I think also know that like whatever experience, background, talents, interests that you have, like there's a place for that, like in a classroom and in schools, and like kids benefit from having like a diverse people in their classrooms. And so like wherever you're coming from, there is a space like in education for you. And like as someone that like had to try out a couple different schools to see like a couple different grades to see like what worked for me, like be okay with that. Because if I had let the first school that I was at when I was in New York, like color and shape like what I thought about every other school, then I would not have stayed.
Wow.
And so I think like be okay with, because like education is also like, it's a job, it's a career. And in the same way where if you were like working in tech or finance or something else, and people like go to different places and it's totally okay. I know I don't like, it sounds like weird because I don't want to say like, leave the classroom, but I want to say like be okay with like trying a couple settings out that work best for you so that you can stay long term.
That was one of the best pieces of advice actually that my wife gave me. Because starting out, I wanted to go straight into high school and teach high school, but she was like, try middle school. And I was like, I don't want to do middle school because I want more freedom. I want more flexibility, whatever. But the first offer I got was at a middle school, and went there, and man, I loved it. I loved the vibe. There are certain things that you will find that you don't necessarily like, but I gave myself the freedom to experience different contexts. I mean, I went to freaking China. Experience different contexts. And because you never know, you never know what a certain area might look like for you.
So I came into teaching fully thinking like I want high school English, and my first year was at a middle school, and I was like, oh, absolutely not. No,
it is crazy. I love middle school, but
my best friend, she is like a very clear like middle school person. I love children. I love all children. I don't like anyone over like 4th grade. So. And that when like I didn't get into elementary until like my 3rd year, and then I was like, oh, like this is where like I came alive when I taught 3rd grade. And yeah, like I think you just like try out different settings, try out different grades, see like what fits you best. Because like for me, I like K4 is my jam. Like I can do that all day. Really K2, but like elementary, that is where like my heart is. And for some people, it's like middle school. For some people, they only want to teach 9th grade world history, and that is their thing, and they will only teach 9th grade world history. And so I think just be okay with like seeing what works best for you so that you can like find where your space is.
For sure. Man, I appreciate you coming on, Mr. Jonathon.
For sure.
Pulliam.
Yeah. I tell the kids, it's like Pulliam.
Pulliam. Yeah, man. Cool name. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate even sharing this space with you, man, because everything that you're doing, like your whole journey from being a teacher, I mean, even I'm sure you have more stories to tell even before becoming a teacher, you know, that are inspirational as well. But seeing you ascend, you know, and continually climbing up that ladder is extremely important for me. And I think people like me, people younger than me who are trying to find someone to look at, to appreciate, and to see like what they can do.
Appreciate it, yeah.
Man, dude, it's amazing to see that. So I wish you, you know, all the strength, you know, as you're going through your PhD program, man. I mean,
listen, same to you. Chapter 5 is huge.
Just hearing you though, I'm just like, look, man, I know you're going to kill it, and I know you're already killing it. You're in the trenches, and you know, you're not just talking about stuff from the outside. You're inside and you're making change.
It means a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, that's, you know, extremely important. Thank you guys for tuning into the Regular People podcast. Please make sure you guys come back, check us out. Maybe you'll learn something. Maybe you'll get inspired to start your own podcast, or even come on this podcast and have a conversation with your boy, Miles. Anyway, we are getting out of here. Have a good life. Good day.